So in this video I'm going to turn this old cookie into a clock. So I got this cookie from a wedding. It was part of a outdoor wedding table topper. And it was over a year ago, so I let it dry out over the past year. And during that time it did split open like you can see. So first up, get some 60 grit sandpaper, take off much of the grooves as I could. This was cut with a chainsaw, so some of the grooves were pretty deep, and I'm going to cover it with resin, so not going to overcomplicate the sanding process. Then took some oxalic acid, which is basically wood bleach, mix it in warm water. Definitely wear gloves along the way, and then once you get it mixed up, apply it really liberally on these pieces. There's not too many specific directions on there, so I don't think there's a right or wrong amount that you can put on there. Just keep going until you get rid of the spots that you want to remove. And after that, I kind of following the lead of Tom Johnson Woodworking, some other people, of just dousing the piece with water to make sure I rinse off all this acid. Probably should have mounted my camera versus knocking it on the floor there. Then wiped off the excess, and I was not patient. This is a gift and I needed it done by Christmas, so I sped up the process by throwing it in the oven. So ended up putting it in at 200 degrees for 10 minutes at a time, and then each time it would trap a lot of moisture underneath, so I ended up putting some little blocks with finishing nails in there to lift it up a little bit so the moisture wouldn't get trapped underneath. Then the piece that fell off during the oven, just took some CA glue, applied it on there, and then put some activator on the piece of bark itself, which helps it bond much more quickly. I turned off the sound. If you could have heard the sound right there, you would have seen me actually spray myself in the face versus pointing the aerosol can the correct direction, which boneheaded move that smells pretty toxic, so it stays with you for a little while. Anyway, got some clamps to hold it in place, and again, not a whole lot of pressure, just enough to keep it where the glue would set up. Now, as far as the video and the making of this clock are concerned, the glue's held up really well. Hopefully it'll stand the test of time, but we shall see. So this is tape designed for resin because it handles the heat, which this resin really does give off a lot of heat. So the tape handles it well, and I didn't realize I didn't film me mixing the resin together with some black dye. And again, you'll notice here I don't have band-aids on my hand as I'm using my freshly sharpened chisel, and then when you see me removing the tape and some other pieces later, there are band-aids. So I was not really careful. Thankfully, you won't see the blood that was on my hands from me slipping and screwing up a couple of times. But anyway, again, these are not safety videos, so don't pay attention to that part of it. So once I got the resin roughly taken off, then I went back and took some 80 grit and then worked my way up to 220 grit sandpaper to smooth it down. But that resin did penetrate a little deeper than I thought it would, so that was kind of a bummer. But once I got it sanded up, put sanding sealer on here, and I personally really like sanding sealer on live edge pieces like this, so I just apply a lot of it, and it tends to hold in the moss, which I like. Maybe you're not supposed to do it, but I just like the look of it. So I apply it on both sides and then all over the bark, and then let it sit on those little pegs again, so that way it could dry out. After a couple hours of letting that sanding sealer set in, lightly sanded the top parts of it, and then here mixed up some more resin and just poured it on top. And I used my silicone mat, which is great for this kind of stuff because the resin doesn't stick to it, so I had no problems, and did it on top of a level table, which is a really good point for something like this. Make sure you're using a level surface. If not, you kind of put yourself in a really tough spot and end up where it's going to have a dry patch on top and you'll have to start over again, or at least add to it, maybe not start over. And then the heat gun here gets rid of all the air bubbles on top, so it doesn't have to be extreme heat, just enough to get it loose. And here I left this part in just to show you what it looks like and how easily the resin will separate from silicone. Wish I would have looked at the video. I would have seen that it's easier to take off this way than trying to do it the way I started out. And what I did not show is me using my chisel to clean up the bottom on the underside where those really thick pieces are. But on the edges, just broke out a coping saw and went along the edge of the bark here to get rid of all the really big chunks, and then was able to just use a sharp chisel again to get rid of the fine pieces. And I did leave this in real time so that way you can kind of see it's not too difficult to cut through this stuff. It's essentially soft plastic at this point. Then for the clock mechanism itself, just trace the outline with the pencil. And again, you can see the excess resin was a good bit thicker earlier, but I did kind of chisel off the big chunks and they came off pretty easily, and then sanded it down very lightly later as I'm finishing up after using the router here. So I made a really crude template about the size of the mechanism. Again, there are the band-aids. So you can use the router, it's a guide, so that way I could just keep going down in probably 1/4 inch increments each time, maybe a little less. And this just guides me from that way, getting too out of hand or letting the router take off where it wants to take off. So I ended up doing many more passes than you see here on the camera. And then here, the game plan is I'm not good at drilling straight holes. So I took a piece of scrap wood, went to the drill press and drilled a straight hole straight through here, and then used double-sided tape, which I can never get the paper backing off. So when you see the extra set of hands, it's because I needed help. I couldn't do it by myself. So anyway, the scrap piece of wood, the intent here is the double-sided tape holds it in place, and then your drill bit does go in straight. So when you have this sacrificial piece, which has the hole that's already straight, and you put your drill bit in there, it keeps it so you drill a straight hole perpendicular to your piece, which is what I need. What's left, I did just a little bit of CA glue. I didn't want this piece to be 100% permanent, but if it broke, for whatever reason, needed to be replaced in the future, you could get it out. And again, not patient, so I used the activator to get it to adhere much more quickly. Again, a lot of trial and error off screen to get the right depth. So there we go, the hour hand is round entirely, so it goes on first, and then the minute hand does have a fitted groove, which I intended for you to see on camera, but I don't know if you could or not. And it's just a really simple little cap. Once you get it on, flip it over, and there's an on-off switch to let it go. It just runs off one little AA battery. So here's a look at the finished product. Turned out pretty good. The inadvertent cross there, that was unintentional, but not too bad for Christmas time. And then the mounting bracket on the back, just marked in 2 holes, did pilot holes with 2 little short screws, and then again the tape, mark it to the depth of the screws, and when the tape knocks away your wood chips, you know you're at the right depth. So all in all, I think it turned out pretty well. Probably should have done a little bit more lighting when I show you guys here the finished product on the wall, but I like it. And thanks for watching. See you guys.